Sixth and final session of the Ohio State University Nighsonger Center Echo on empowering DSPs. We will be hearing from Josh Young, Director of Operations for the Ohio Network for Innovation, who will be sharing supported decision-making strategies and tools for everyday life while serving individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental health conditions. Our learning objectives for today, we'd like participants to be able to define and describe the process of supported decision making and its importance in mental health care and treatment, to describe how supported decision making supports self-advocacy, self-determination, mental health, and emotional wellness and well-being, to describe how legal guardianship impacts supported decision making, to identify barriers and how to implement supported decision-making tools and strategies to support adults with intellectual disability, and to discuss the importance of cultural variables and family dynamics when using these tools and strategies. At this time, I welcome Josh to the stage as he shares his slides. And thank you, Josh, for presenting today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I always appreciate the opportunity to share with this group in particular and the challenge to everything that I want to share in 15 to 20 minutes. So I do go quickly, but to echo what Andrew was saying, there will be a couple of places here where I invite feedback. Please put it in the chat, unmute yourselves, talk. It'll make this go much better. If somebody can monitor the chat and just let me know if there's something in there that's relevant, that would be helpful too. All right, so let me get my view going. All right, you can all see the screen, support decision-making in everyday life, but that's all you can see. So let's talk about supported decision-making. First opportunity for you guys to just tell me, does anybody want to guess or does anybody know what supported decision-making is? Either unmute yourself, put something in the chat to get us going. Give it like 3 more seconds. All right,
Josh,
so
can you repeat your question, please?
yeah, just throw something in the chat about what you think or know that supported decision-making is. What do we got in the chat there? I see one thing. All right, we discussed decisions to be made together, talk about alternative choices, make decisions with outside guidance, coming together to support those we serve. Yeah, you guys are hitting it. Great. So I try to talk about supported decision making as 3 different things. They're different, but definitely related. So the first thing is that supported decision making is a movement. This has been happening all across the world for quite a while now. There are countries in the world that have been doing this for a while and doing it really, really well. There are states in our country that have been doing it for a while and even changing their laws to make sure that it's happening. There is some legislation right now in Ohio aimed at trying to acknowledge supported decision making, but we won't talk a whole lot about that today, and it's hitting a few barriers, but we still have our fingers crossed that it'll be successful in the long run. So, number one, it's a movement. Number two, supported decision making is a less restrictive alternative to guardianship. So, a lot of us have heard about guardianship. We'll talk about that in a few slides. Yes, sometimes guardianship is the best way to support people with decision making. Other times, there are other less restrictive alternatives that we can and should be using before we end up at guardianship, because guardianship is the legal removal of a person's legal or civil rights. So it's pretty serious. We don't want to just jump to that when there could be other things that we can do that preserve or maintain that person's rights first. And then third, supported decision making is just a natural part of life. Everybody does it. We don't all call it supported decision making, but anytime that you ask for help to make decisions, ask for guidance, go to others that you trust, you're doing supported decision making. So I also talk about supported decision making like this. What is it? It's about helping people make an informed choice, not just helping people make their own decisions, but informed decisions. To the best of their ability, do they understand their options? Can they think through the risks, the benefits, the pros, the cons? And then can they express a decision with some understanding of how it might impact their life? It is also about providing creative support to people. The kind of support that you provide to one person is going to look different than the kind of support that you provide to another person. In fact, the kind of support you provide to one person may look different depending on the kind of decision that they are faced with. We'll talk more about that in a second. And finally, and this is sometimes the hardest part, especially in the IDD field or the mental health field, it is about respecting the person's decision once they make it. So if we provide all of this support and then the person makes their own decision, our role then is to respect their decision. Now, of course, there are going to be some exceptions where the person really didn't understand their decision or they're trying to make a decision that's going to result in extreme harm. Then yes, we may have to take some other action and respond differently. All right, what is supported decision making not? Well, first of all, it's not a magic wand. It doesn't fix everything that we want it to fix. We're not here to fix, right? But it's also not about exercising undue influence. When we're helping people understand their options, make more of their own decisions, we're doing so in as objective a way as possible. So we're not presenting information to them in a way that leads them to one decision over the other based on maybe our own personal biases. It's not about preventing bad decisions either. If I would ask all of you, you could probably remember a time when you made a decision that didn't work out that well, or when you made a decision that others in your life maybe didn't agree with. And sometimes we make those decisions and they don't work out well, and we learn from it, or we wish maybe we would have taken other people's advice. But other times we make decisions that others don't agree with, and they actually turn out pretty well for us. So this whole idea of a bad decision, I think we need to question who's determining that it is a bad decision, and can we learn from some of these decisions? So that's not what supported decision making is about. Even if we do all this work to support people, they make a decision, and then the decision does not work out the way that they had hoped, that doesn't mean that supported decision making didn't work. And finally, it's not about substitute decision making. We don't do all of this and then at the end say, okay, great, but here's the decision that you really need to make. Remember, we're respecting their decision. Okay, why does any of this matter? Because it is related to self-determination. So basically having more control, more choice in your own life. And we know some things. We know that people with more self-determination, again, more control over their lives, they just tend to live better lives. They live more independently, they have more financial independence, they have better jobs that pay more. And if that's all that we got from supporting people to have more self-determination, I think we'd all kind of celebrate that, right? Those are some big achievements, but it goes way beyond that. So people with more self-determination are also more likely to be included in their communities, spend time with friends, go on dates, have more privacy, be able to practice their religion, just have their rights respected. And probably the biggest one, people with more self-determination, again, more control over their lives, they're better at identifying and resisting things like abuse and exploitation. So that's a pretty big one. And we know some things about people who don't have as much self-determination, who aren't as involved in the decision making or don't have as much control over their lives. Like they just might not develop decision-making skills. They might not be included in decisions that affect them as they get older. Sometimes that's as simple as what to eat. Other times that's things like medical decisions. So imagine if someone else was making your medical decisions for you, what kind of medications you took, what kind of treatment you would undergo, things like that. And then when people don't get opportunities to participate in or make their own decisions, then it's hard to really develop that decision-making skill. And it can become this cyclical pattern of the person doesn't have opportunities to practice making decisions, and then they don't develop the skills to make decisions. So then the next time that a decision is presented, people don't have faith that they can make the decision because they don't have the skills. And so they, again, don't have an opportunity to make those decisions. And it just keeps going and going and going. And so people who aren't involved in those decisions that affect their life can really experience some negative outcomes in terms of their mental and emotional well-being. All right, great. Those are the basic principles of supported decision making, but we like to focus on how you can actually do it. When you leave here, when you go to your day-to-day interactions with people, what can you do? We'll give three things. The first one, assume capacity or presume capacity. What we're saying here is that most people, if they're given the right kind of support, can probably make more of their own decisions than they currently are. But we have to assume that they can if we provide the support, because sometimes we make this assumption about people, that decision-making capacity is all or nothing. Either a person can or can't make their own decisions. So it's not as binary as sometimes we present it. Decision-making capacity is not static. It doesn't stay the same all the time. We can develop decision-making skills, and our decision-making capacity can be affected by a lot of other factors. We'll talk about that in a few slides here. So rather than an all or nothing, either this person can make their decisions or they can't, this is probably a better model or lens through which to see that. And this applies to everybody, disability or not. There are some areas in our lives where we are probably confident, experienced, we don't need a whole lot of help to make these decisions. There are also areas in our lives or decisions where we are not as experienced or confident or comfortable, and we may need to ask for help to make those decisions. That doesn't mean that we can't make the decision. It just means that we need help to do so. So I'm going to skip this next slide, which is a video, just for the sake of time. All right. So the second thing that we can do after we assume capacity, assume that the person can if they get the right kind of support, is to challenge some common misconceptions. And one of those common misconceptions is that legal guardianship is the best way to support somebody with decision making, or that it's necessary for people with disabilities. Again, sometimes it is the best way. Other times there are much better ways that preserve that person's rights. So here's some common misconceptions that we often hear about guardianship. It's important to know these so we can kind of challenge them if they come up. The first one is, well, I have to get guardianship of my son or daughter, especially for parents, when they turn 18. This is not true. There are lots of other ways that we can support people with decision making that don't necessarily involve guardianship. And even if we don't pursue guardianship at the age of 18 and we try some of these other less restrictive alternatives and we find that they didn't quite work the way that we had hoped, we can then revisit the idea of guardianship later. So sometimes schools tell parents that they have to get guardianship. Schools are not doing this to be malicious or intentionally misleading. We found that schools just don't know that there are other less restrictive alternatives. So that's one of the misconceptions that we need to challenge. Okay, fine, but if I don't get guardianship, then I'm not going to be involved in the person's life, not going to be able to get access to information that I need to help them make decisions. Also not true. This one's pretty easy to address. Most of us, if not all of us, have signed something like a release of information, a HIPAA release in our lives. It allows important information about us to be shared with other people. And then if necessary, those other people can help us understand that information to make our own decisions. But this is probably the biggest misconception that we hear. Well, that's all fine, but we need guardianship to protect the person from harm, from getting arrested, abuse, neglect, exploitation. So there is no study out there that shows that people under guardianship are any safer than people who do not have a guardian. So we have this common misconception that it's going to protect people. But in reality, with some exceptions in extreme situations, guardianship is not going to allow us to force someone to do something that they don't want to do, or to prevent them from doing something they are really dead set on doing. Sometimes we'll get referrals for guardianship at ONI, and it'll be because someone, won't keep their house clean or won't take their medications. If we become guardian, that's not necessarily going to change. As guardian, we can tell the person, hey, I think you really need to take your medication. But if they say no, we're not going to force them to do that. And if they're really dead set on going to do something, they're often going to find a way to do it. I was in a meeting years ago with somebody who had a guardian. I was with him and his provider. And the first thing he said in the meeting was that he wanted to donate his plasma. Well, why did he want to do that? He was being resourceful. He wanted money, right? But the guardian kept saying, no, you're not donating your plasma. We're not here to talk about that. Let's move on. She tried to move the meeting forward, but he kept bringing up donating his plasma. Eventually, we got to the end of the meeting, and the guardian left, and I went back to my office. And then this guy left his apartment, and he walked down the street, and he donated his plasma. The guardian hadn't given consent for it, but there was really nothing that she could do to stop it. So these are some of the common misconceptions that we have to challenge when we're talking about supported decision making, or when we're advocating for people to have more control over their own decisions. One of the other things we need to do is just kind of be aware of what some of these other less restrictive alternatives are. So we're not going to do a deep dive on these. I'm just going to mention some of them. So, a payee can help somebody manage their benefit money if that's the kind of support that they need. If they have a lot of money, we can look at a trust fund. An executor of that trust fund can help disperse that money. A power of attorney is a way that we can appoint someone to make certain decisions for us about medical stuff or financial stuff if we lose the capacity to make those decisions for ourselves in the future. Supported decision making, just asking people for help, for advice to make decisions when we need it. In Ohio, we have this chosen rep option where people with disabilities can appoint someone to help them or to make decisions on their behalf about their IDD services. It doesn't extend beyond that. It's just for the IDD services, but I can ask somebody to choose my providers with or for me, to talk about what should be in my individual service plan, how to use my waiver budget to pay for services. So that's a chosen rep. Limited guardianship. When we think of guardianship, we often think of full guardianship, and we may not even be aware that that's what we're doing. But we don't have to necessarily remove all of a person's rights, even if they do need a guardian to help them with some decision making. We can always approach a court and say, yeah, Josh probably does need a guardian for something like medical decisions, but he's cool to make decisions about where he lives and where he works and who he hangs out with. Great. A judge can actually appoint a limited guardian, and then that guardian has the scope of authority that is limited to medical decisions. Technology, I'll share a quick story. I use an Alexa at home. If I'm cooking on a stove and I walk away from the kitchen, I will forget that I'm cooking on a stove. So I say, Alexa, set a timer for 8 minutes. So I figure in 8 minutes, I'm not going to burn the house down at least. Sometimes I'll be embarrassed and I'll walk out of the kitchen and think, I did not need to set that alarm. I got this. And like 2 minutes later, I'm involved in something completely different, forgetting that I'm cooking. But then the Alexa goes off, comes back, or brings me back to the kitchen. So it allows me to have more control over my life, make more of my own decisions. If I wasn't using an Alexa, there would be many people, including probably myself from 15 years ago or so, who would say, man, I don't know that you should live alone. Or at the very least, I don't know that you should cook by yourself, right? But I get to use that technology to help me have that control. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to technology. And then we talked about a release of information as well. So in many cases, you can use any combination of these things that will work for a person. And remember, each person is going to need a different kind of support or a different combination of support. This is probably the most impactful question that we have found to ask when the issue of guardianship comes up. It's what are we trying to accomplish with it? And if we take the time to ask that question, we will often find that there are other ways to support someone to make their own decisions that don't involve removing their rights, or that guardianship actually isn't going to accomplish that thing that we thought it was going to, like keeping them safe. So even if there is a guardian in place, and sometimes there will need to be a guardian in place, it doesn't mean that we can't also practice supported decision-making or support that person to make as many of their own decisions as possible. We won't get into it today, but there's a lot of guidance from the Ohio State Supreme Court that says, as the guardian, I'm actually supposed to defer to the person under guardianship, whatever they want, and advocate for that, as long as it's not going to result in immediate and substantial risk of harm, things like that. All right, third thing that we can do is provide that creative support. Great, but what does that actually look like? First thing is help people identify who in their life they can go to ask for help, to get guidance, advice to make decisions. Think for yourself. You probably have people in your own family, people you work with, maybe some of your friends, professionals, and for some people with IDD, you may be the professional in their life, or other community members. Do they go to church? Are they part of a recreational sports team? Things like that. So help people think about who they can go to get advice or help to make decisions first. That starts building that network for people. And then if you have been involved in a system for, I don't know, 10 or more years, you may remember when person-centered practices were kind of mandated and everybody kind of jumped at supporting people now to think and do differently. Well, one of the questions I remember asking when we started doing things a little differently, I would say, all right, great, we're going to do things differently. What do you want to do with your life? Well, that's a big question. And if somebody had never been presented with that question before, they didn't necessarily know how to answer that question, right? So sometimes we just have to meet people where they are at. So the first thing is, do you need help with this decision? Do you know that you can ask for help? With that said, Just because somebody has a disability does not mean that they're always going to need help to make a decision. But do they know they can ask for it? Second, do you have all the information that you need? If you remember back to math class, the word problems, multiple choice. And sometimes one of those multiple choice answers was, there's just not enough information to solve this problem. Life is like that sometimes too, but we can feel pressured to make a decision even if we don't understand it well enough. So sometimes it's, you know what, I need to learn more about this, or I need to go to one of those people in my network who knows more about this to help me understand it better before I make the decision. Related, do you have enough time to think about it? It can feel like we have to make decisions in the moment a lot. For most decisions in life, we don't. For most decisions, we can ask for more time. And sometimes with that more time, we can go learn more about it, get additional advice, get additional support. I asked this question to a group of self-advocates several years ago. I said, do you ever feel pressured to make decisions? And I hadn't thought of it, but this guy raised his hand and shared it, so I'm going to share it too. He said, yes, at the fast food drive-through, which I thought was brilliant, right? If you haven't been to that fast food restaurant before, or it's been a while since you've been there, or you just don't know what you want, or the menu has changed, as soon as you roll up and that loudspeaker comes on and says, can I take your order? If you got a line of cars behind you, you may feel pressured to make a decision. You may even decide that you want something, or you may order something that you don't actually want. Now, that is if we're talking about a fast food drive-through, but what if it's an ISP meeting or a doctor's appointment, a counseling session, or at a bank, something like that? If we don't know that we can ask for more time and then go get some help to understand it or go get some advice, we may end up making a lot of decisions that we don't really want to make for ourselves. And then is anybody telling us what to do? This is not necessarily a bad thing, but who's telling us? Is it an expert, somebody who really knows what they're talking about, somebody that we trust? And finally, do you want to change your mind? Can you change your mind? There are going to be many decisions in life where you can change your mind later, but there are going to be some decisions in life where once you decide this, you can't change your mind, or you have to wait a while before you can change your mind. For some of us, that might be, enrollment in a healthcare plan. There's an open enrollment season, but once you decide that you are or are not taking that insurance, you got to wait about another year before you can change that, right? All right, we won't go through all of these, but I just want you to see that there are lots of ways that we can help people, creative ways that we can support people to make their own decisions. Change complicated information into words that they can understand. Try explaining a Medicaid waiver to somebody in a way that they can understand, disability or not. Make a list of pros and cons. Use pictures or videos to explain things. Help people look up information. Help people learn how to use technology. Sometimes a calendar just to remember important appointments, dates, information. Prepare for meetings. If I'm going to have to make decisions in a meeting, help me prepare for those decisions so it doesn't feel so pressured. And then just help me advocate, help me speak up for what I want and even express my final decision. All right, this is the last thing I'm going to do. I know I'm a little bit over time here. Just another tool. It's a decision-making profile. I invite everybody to kind of do this for themselves. And then once you have an understanding, think about this when you're supporting other people. We all need support to make decisions. What does my kind of support look like? I'll share it while I do that. You think about yourself. I like to get information as visuals. Yes, I can read well, but if you give me a lot of text or page upon page upon page of something that I have to read before I make a decision, I will be bored out of my mind. I will lose track. I'll start rereading the same paragraph over and over and over again because I can't focus. So if you break that up with visuals or graphics to help me understand that are relevant to the information, great. I'll understand it better, can make a better decision. How to present choices to me. Don't tell me what to do. It has never worked for me. It's not going to work for me. I'm not necessarily proud of this, but if you tell me what to do, my first inclination is to do the exact opposite, even if the thing that you're telling me to do is probably in my best interest. So I know that about myself. Again, not proud of it, but if you're supporting me to make decisions, you should know that about me too. But also present limited choices to me. If you give me 10 choices, that's too many. If you give me 3 or 4 choices, I can process that. For me, using analogies to help me understand information. So explain that this is kind of like that situation where one of my friends or family members had gone through something. And if I can remember that, I can relate to it better. Sometimes it's going to be a scene from a favorite movie or TV show or a character. Hey, you remember my favorite TV show is The X-Files. You remember that show, The X-Files, that episode where Fox Mulder, one of the characters, had to decide who to trust? You, Josh, are in a similar situation. That's the decision that you're faced with. That'll help me understand. When's the best time for me to make decisions? There's not a specific time of day, but if I'm having a good day, things are going well, I'm happy. Yes, present me with decisions then. Don't present me with important decisions when I'm having a bad day, when I'm upset, when I'm angry, when I'm scared, right? That's not a great time. And remember, we don't typically have to make decisions in that moment. So give me some time to process. But also, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., I should not be making important decisions. I am in a completely different headspace. I think I'm a genius during that time, but the things I order off of Amazon during that time, I regret most of the time in the morning. So different headspace. And the last thing is risk. When we're having conversations about risk or decisions that involve risk, let's try to do so from an objective standpoint. This is a risk matrix that can help us do that. On the left-hand side, ask how likely is this bad thing to actually happen? And across the top, if it did happen, how bad would it actually be? Quick example, and then we'll end. I was working with a guy who wanted to play recreational kickball. And half the team said, oh no, he's going to get hit in the face with a kickball. How many of you have been hit in the face with something like a kickball before and lived to tell about it, right? So instead of jumping to the hypothetical worst case scenario, we can use something like a risk matrix here to investigate or explore that decision. How likely is it that this guy's going to get hit in the face with a kickball if he plays? And it's possible. If you play a sport, you might get hurt with some implement of that sport. But then across the top, how bad would it actually be if he did get hit in the face with a kickball? Probably negligible, minimal. A lot of us have lived to tell about it, right? So that risk is actually low or moderate instead of this higher extreme risk that we were imagining. And then this is where growth typically happens for people in the moderate to high range. There is no place on that risk matrix that says no risk because every decision in our life involves risk. You're going to get in your car at some point today, probably drive somewhere or take a ride somewhere. When you get out, you're probably not going to say, man, that was a really powerful ride or drive home. I really grew as a person from that. But is there risk in driving or riding in a car or vehicle? Of course there is. It's just not typically the kind of risk that we grow from. So if we prevent people from making decisions that do involve moderate, sometimes even high risk, what we're essentially doing is preventing people from growing. So 3 things you can do. Assume that people have the capacity to make decisions if they get the right kind of support. Challenge misconceptions, ask the right questions, get the information we need to support people, and make every effort that we can to support people in those creative ways to make those decisions. That is it. Thank you for your time for listening.
Thank you, Josh. Really appreciate that presentation on supported decision making and its potential impact on helping individuals grow and really empowering them with respecting their autonomy. It's really great to see all those visuals and examples as well that you provided. One question in the chat for you. Are there efforts in the works around Ohio educating schools about supported decision making? You had mentioned that there was kind of limited knowledge
Yep.
from schools about all these different options. Any training that you're aware of or
Yeah, there are
resources?
quite a few resources out there. The first one I'll offer is the Supported Decision Making Network of Ohio. We helped to co-found that. It is officially now a 501(c)(3), and it pulls together a lot of people from different organizations, people with lived experience, family members, attorneys. And the goal is to make sure that information about supported decision making kind of makes it to every corner of the state, to anybody who needs it, so people can learn what it is and how to practice it. So there are a lot of organizations involved in that that you can connect with. Thank you, Andrew. Um, Connect with to kind of get more information. We have a monthly meeting as well where you can join. We start with a story about someone who has used it, and then we talk about the efforts we're making. The next meeting is actually Wednesday. So if you're interested in that, let me know and we can share the link if you'd like to attend. But that's at least one of the efforts that's being made to reach schools.
Great. Thanks again, Josh. I also dropped a link to that website, the Supported Decision Making Network of Ohio, in the chat for you to access. If you have any other questions or would like to engage in the chat, please do so. At this time, we'll transition to our case study, and today's case I'll be pulling up here for us.